All right, everyone, get ready because today we're taking a deep dive into the history of Thanksgiving.
Oh,
And here's the twist, we're not talking about, the classic Thanksgiving dinner or the Macy's parade.
right.
We're going deeper than that, beyond the traditions, to really explore the historical realities behind this holiday.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, it might change how you see that second helping of turkey.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We're taking a critical look at the traditional Thanksgiving story,
Okay.
and to guide our deep dive, we're focusing on an article called No More American Thanksgivings from the Black Commentator, published back in 2003.
Okay, so this is not a new take on Thanksgiving. This article has been around for a while,
Nope, not new at all.
and it sounds like it's a pretty strong critique of the holiday.
It is. The article doesn't mince words.
Okay.
It straight up calls Thanksgiving a ghoulish event.
A ghoulish event. Wow, that's intense.
Yeah.
Why would the author use such a strong word to describe a holiday that so many people associate with, family and gratitude and all that good stuff?
Well, because they're arguing that the Thanksgiving story, the one we're all familiar with, Pilgrims and Native Americans sharing a peaceful meal.
Yeah, the classic image.
It's actually a carefully constructed myth,
A myth.
a myth that conceals a much darker, more brutal reality.
Okay, so you're saying there's more to the story than we've been told.
Way more.
And that this feel-good image of Thanksgiving is actually covering up some uncomfortable truths about history.
Exactly. And it's this hidden reality with its deep ties to white supremacy in America that the author finds so disturbing.
This is making me think back to that first Thanksgiving in 1621.
Yeah.
The one we always hear about. What does this article say really happened back then?
Well, the article challenged that picture of a peaceful gathering.
Okay.
It even suggests that the Wampanoag, led by Chief Massasoit, might not have even been invited.
Not invited.
Yeah, they might have crashed the party.
Crashed it.
Or brought a really large group, maybe for protection.
So maybe not the friendly potluck we've always imagined.
Right. It paints a very different picture.
It sounds like there was already some tension, some underlying tension between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag even back then.
Oh, absolutely. And there's evidence to support that.
Okay.
The article mentions that the Pilgrims actually built a
A
wall
wall, like to keep people out.
to keep the Native Americans out. Not exactly a welcoming gesture.
No, not at
Not-
all. That doesn't fit with the whole unity and togetherness idea we usually associate with Thanksgiving.
Nope. And this is just the tip of the iceberg.
I was going to say.
The article argues that the real Thanksgiving, the one that was officially recognized, happened later,
Oh.
and for a very different reason.
So the Thanksgiving we know today with the turkey and the parades and all that,
Yeah,
that wasn't the original Thanksgiving?
not quite. The first official Thanksgiving was declared in 1637, and get this, they were celebrating the massacre of the Pequot tribe.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
They were giving thanks for a massacre.
Unfortunately, yes. The article goes into some pretty chilling detail about the event.
It's hard to even imagine something so horrific being celebrated, let alone becoming a national holiday.
And yet that's exactly what happened.
So tell me more about this massacre. What exactly happened?
Well, the colonists, along with their allies, basically slaughtered hundreds of Pequot men, women, and children.
Oh my gosh.
The article even quotes William Bradford, who was a prominent Pilgrim leader at the time.
Right.
He described seeing Pequot women and children being burned alive.
That's just awful. I can't believe this is part of the Thanksgiving story.
It's a dark chapter that's often ignored.
Yeah, no kidding. And what happened after the massacre?
Well, the Pequot tribe was essentially wiped out.
Wiped out?
Yeah. The few who survived were sold into slavery.
So the Thanksgiving we celebrate today is built on violence and oppression.
That's what the article argues.
Hmm?
It claims that the traditional Thanksgiving story is basically a way to whitewash this brutal history.
This is already making me see Thanksgiving in a whole new light. It's almost ironic that a holiday about gratitude and togetherness has such a dark and violent past.
It's definitely ironic. And unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. Remember that tension we talked about between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag?
Yeah.
Well, a few decades later, that tension boiled over into a full-blown war.
A war.
Yeah, and it had devastating consequences for the Native Americans.
I have a feeling this is where the story takes another dark turn. Tell me more about this war.
Well, it's called King Philip's War,
Okay.
and it took place in the 1670s.
So just a few generations after that supposed first Thanksgiving.
Exactly. And it was the culmination of decades of escalating tensions between the colonists and the Wampanoag.
It's hard to believe that the same groups who shared a meal in 1621 were at war just a few decades later. What happened in between?
Well, that's a question the article really tries to address.
Oh.
It argues that the story of King Philip's War is often overlooked or even completely left out of the traditional Thanksgiving narrative.
Like people just want to pretend it never happened?
Yeah, kind of. But this war, it reveals the brutal reality of colonial expansion
Hmm.
and the devastating impact it had on Native American populations.
Okay, so tell me more about the war itself. What happened?
Well, it lasted for over a year,
Over a year.
and it was marked by extreme brutality on both
I
sides.
can imagine.
But the colonists, they had superior weaponry,
Yeah, that makes sense.
and they also had alliances with other Native American tribes who had their own grievances with the Wampanoag.
So it was a complex conflict with a lot of different groups involved.
Very complex. And the article emphasizes just how ruthless the colonists were.
Oh,
They offered bounties for Native American scalps.
bounties for scalps. That's horrifying.
It is. And they also sold captured Native Americans into slavery.
Wow, this is really shattering the myth of peaceful coexistence that we usually associate with Thanksgiving.
Right. It paints a very different picture.
And what was the outcome of the war?
Well, it was devastating for the Native Americans.
Yeah.
The article estimates that nearly half of the Native American population in the region was either killed or enslaved during the war.
Half the population. That's just unbelievable.
It was a massive loss of life. Entire villages were destroyed, and the Wampanoag tribe, which was once a powerful force in the region,
Right.
was essentially decimated.
And to think this war, with all its brutality and its consequences, is often just left out of the Thanksgiving story.
That's exactly the point the article is making.
Hmm.
It's arguing that this Thanksgiving myth, this sanitized version of history that we tell ourselves,
Yeah.
it serves to erase the real experiences of Native Americans.
To pretend like it never happened.
Right. And to legitimize the actions of the colonists.
It's like we're celebrating a holiday that's based on a lie.
It's a disturbing thought. And there's one particularly chilling detail that the article mentions. After the war ended, the colonists displayed the severed head of Metacomet, the Wampanoag leader,
Oh, wow.
who was known as King Philip.
Yep.
They displayed his severed head on a pike in Plymouth
On a pike.
for years.
That's just gruesome.
It's a disturbing image. And the article argues that it wasn't just about revenge.
Okay.
It was a symbolic act meant to send a message of fear and subjugation to any remaining Native Americans.
Like a warning.
Yeah, basically saying this is what happens to those who resist us.
This is heavy stuff. We've gone from a peaceful feast to massacres, wars, and severed heads. It's clear that the Thanksgiving story we've been told is incomplete, to say the least. But I'm curious, where does slavery fit into all this?
That's a great question and a really important one.
Yeah.
The article makes a direct connection between the genocide of Native Americans and the enslavement of Africans,
Okay.
arguing that those two forms of oppression are intertwined. In fact, the article claims that Native Americans were already being enslaved in the colonies
Okay.
long before the arrival of African slaves.
So you're saying that slavery was already happening in the colonies even before the transatlantic slave trade began?
Exactly. And it's often overlooked in how we understand American history.
This is blowing my mind.
The article even cites a book called A Defense of Virginia,
Oh.
which was written by a pro-slavery author.
Okay.
And ironically, he points out that the New England colonies, the ones we associate with the Pilgrims and Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
they were heavily involved in the slave trade from the very beginning.
Wow. So it's like they were trying to justify the enslavement of Africans by pointing to the actions of the Pilgrims.
Exactly. The article argues that both genocide and slavery were driven by the same fundamental forces,
Which were?
the insatiable desire for land, resources, and power.
So basically greed and exploitation.
Yeah, pretty much. The article paints a picture of the colonists ruthlessly pursuing their own interests, no matter the cost to others.
This is really making me rethink everything I thought I knew about Thanksgiving. The story we tell ourselves, the one with the Pilgrims and the friendly feast. It's not only inaccurate, but it's actually part of a much larger and much more sinister narrative.
Right, a narrative of colonialism, oppression, and the erasure of Native American history and experiences.
It's like we've been celebrating a holiday that's built on a foundation of lies and violence.
It's a difficult truth to confront, And the article argues that this narrative didn't just disappear after the colonial period.
You mean it continued?
It continued to be shaped and reinterpreted throughout American history.
Okay, how so?
Well, often to serve the interests of, the dominant group.
So you're saying that the Thanksgiving myth was used even centuries later to further specific agendas.
Exactly.
But how does that connect to Abraham Lincoln?
Well, think about it. It was President Lincoln in the middle of the Civil War in 1863
Okay.
who formally established Thanksgiving as a national holiday fixed on the fourth Thursday in November.
So he was trying to unify a divided nation, using Thanksgiving as a symbol of shared values, national unity, all that.
Yes, but the article suggests there's a deeper layer to it. It argues that by emphasizing the 1621 feast and the Pilgrim narrative,
Okay.
Lincoln was appealing to a shared white identity, essentially creating a sense of unity, but a unity built on a very specific and, exclusionary version of history.
So while it might have seemed like a unifying gesture, it was actually reinforcing a narrative that erased Native Americans.
And glossed over their suffering.
That's pretty thought-provoking.
It is, and it raises some important questions about the legacy of Thanksgiving and how it continues to shape our perceptions, even today.
This is all a lot to take in. I mean, we've gone from a heartwarming holiday story to a pretty disturbing look at the dark side of American history.
It's not always easy to face these uncomfortable truths.
But it's important. And I think it's clear that the Thanksgiving myth has a lot more to it than we usually think about.
It does. And the article goes on to argue that this myth continues to have a real impact on American society.
You mean like beyond just the Thanksgiving holiday itself?
Exactly. It claims that this myth, this story we tell ourselves about the Pilgrims and the Native Americans, it actually influences how we see ourselves as a nation and even how we interact with the rest of the world.
I'm interested to hear more about that, but I think we'll have to save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds good. We've got a lot more to unpack.
Yeah, we do. To be continued.